So everybody is got some caffeine in their bodies systems. Yeah. Okay. So next up, we have a very interesting panel. In 2023, when we started off saying we're going to talk about non-binary, we're going to talk about LGBTQIA, it was a first for Anita B in India. Only 80% of this world is cishet. 20%, that's a large number, are people who are part of various kinds of the gender spectrums that we have before us. And it's important for us to include them in our dialogue. Bo yesterday was speaking about how India has always historically been very, very inclusive, whether it's our culture, whether it's our acceptance, whether it's all of it. It is a very white supremacist ideology. And somebody asked me today, oh, but white people will get offended. And I was like, yeah, but they've been offending us for centuries and we did nothing about it. Yeah. So we will call it out. We will call out patriarchy. We will call out misogyny. We will call out what it is for what it is. It's about time we gave things the right names instead of putting labels on them. So let's take off the labels. Let's bring in some truth. Let's bring in some honesty. And on that note, I'm very, very happy to share that our next panel is a wonderful combination of people, human beings, who have transformed their work, their lives, and their careers. And they're here to speak about representation. Often that is slightly outside of the boundaries that we draw around ourselves. Without further ado, I'm going to invite up on stage Amrita Chaudhary, Amita Karkhedkar, Veena Kulkarni to come join us. And Amrita is going to moderate this session. Yes, let's have a huge round of applause. And Amrita, it's over to you. Amrita, Amita, and Veena, thank you for joining us today. All yours.
Just checking my mic. Hello everyone, and good afternoon. I know it's been a lot of sessions and a lot of insights, and I'm extremely excited about this panel today. So let's get started. My pronouns are she and her. I'm one of the co-founders at a company called Breath Beings. We extensively work in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So many people ask us, and I'm sure Veena would agree, that what is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and what is it that you do? So we work with organizations like yours, where we talk to people about what does it mean to work together, understand what are differences, what are similarities. So that's the space that I come from. And I have with me Amita Karadkherkar, SVP Technology of a captive of a global bank. Her pronouns are she and her, and she heads the quality engineering function. Besides that, she has been an advocate on multiple platforms, and you must give her TED Talk a listen. She leverages her tech experience and leadership to advocate for women and non binary individuals. So, giving a big round of applause and welcoming Amita. My second panelist, Veena Kulkarni, is the founder at Road to Utopia and a co-founder of Maya Bazaar. Her pronouns are she and her. She started her work advocating for DI a year or two before Section 377 was written down. She's also one of the founding members at All Sorts of Queer, which is an informal, leaderless, peer-to-peer queer support group, and a parent to twins, one boy and one girl, and I did the tongue twister. Yes. So, welcome, Veena. Let's give her a
Thank
big
you.
round of
Thank
applause.
you all.
So, today's panel explores strategies to build an inclusive workplace for LGBTQI folks and non binary folks. I'm very excited about the title itself, which is Beyond the Binary, because we're so used to looking at the world with a binary lens, right? Which is there's always a either or. But most of the times, our actual life experiences happen in the messy middle, the fluidity and the nuances which are there between the black and white, right? So Beyond the Binary is something which is very special to all the three of us, and we're very excited to be here. I'm sure many of you have also come across this research that tells us that 35% of Gen Zs identify beyond traditional gender binaries, and businesses that embrace this diversity do 19% better in terms of innovation. So that's something which is a very important part for us to acknowledge as we're building the future workplaces. So, for the tech world, with all of you, I think the implications are very clear, which is designing for binaries is going to limit us in terms of innovation. It's going to exclude a very, very significant portion of the customer database. And it also stifles potential in so many ways. So, hence, looking beyond the binaries is extremely essential from a business standpoint today. So, today we'll explore why moving beyond binary isn't just an act of inclusion, and it's also a business imperative. So, without any further ado, I think I'm going to invite both of you to take turns and talk about what are some of the changes that you see when it comes to LGBTQI inclusion, non binary inclusion. How has it changed? What has shifted? So, Amita, would you like to start?
Sure. Mic check. You all can hear me, right? Oh, thank you so much for the question. Hi, all. A very good evening to all of you. I hope you had a nice tea break and all refreshed and consumed the information that we are going to share. Today on this particular platform, I feel really humbled and privileged to be able to have this conversation with you all. At the same time, let me also tell you that I'm participating in my own personal capacity. So the views that I'll express are my own and not necessarily resonate with my organization. So coming back to your question, you know, a lot has changed, especially if you look at, let's say, 6, 7 years. I mean, we all know pandemic COVID that happened. It accelerated the digital transformation journey, right? All of us know. I mean, for example, work from home pre-COVID was frowned upon, and then suddenly when lockdown happened, entire workforce started working remotely without any impact to the productivity or to the connectivity. So similarly, this digital transformation technology revolution has been an enabler for the LGBTI plus individuals as well. For example, some of you might know it already. In 2013, um, third gender is a legally recognized gender in India now after 2013. Similarly, in 2019, Government of India has passed Transgender Protections Act. Okay. Now, what has happened after that? Legal digitization of legal access, meaning now trans persons can obtain a transgender card. That card, which is a digital identity card, gives you access, enables you, to venture into healthcare, various government policies and benefits, venture into education sector. You can avail the government benefits that are out there. Similarly, then other benefits, like for example, Aadhaar integration. Now, transgender individuals can get their gender identity on their Aadhaar card. All of us know Aadhaar is the biometric enabled, identification system in India, which is so essential. Wherever we go, show your Aadhaar and we show the Aadhaar and we get the access. Especially the banking, the financial system that we have in India. So imagine with this change, trans persons are able to access all of it because of the Aadhaar integration. Similarly, then, the skill building and employment opportunity aspect of it. I mean, I have been a partner on various initiatives where we have leveraged technology to skill build, especially for the trans persons, which can enable them to venture into the employment sector. Similarly, with digital platforms, now they have information about the various employment opportunities that are available out in the market. All they can do is maybe, with help, create resumes, approach again online, and try to seek employment if they want to venture into the employment sector. Similarly, then let's look at the community building aspect of it. I mean, with the digital platforms, I have witnessed so many positive initiatives that are being run. Like, for example, let's say a trans person who has been abandoned by their families. I have seen community coming together on digital platforms to rehabilitate that particular trans person. So the voice is getting amplified. Similarly, then let's say mental health, a trans person who is seeking help around exploring their identity or how to transition, that information can also be accessed through various digital platform. Various mental health professionals, qualified ones, are extending their help on various digital platforms, and that has been of great help. Similarly, I have also witnessed any discriminatory act, the voices retaliating it are getting amplified using various digital platforms. That's such a positive change that we all have witnessed in the society. But at the same time, I think where we stand, maybe some of you who work in organizations can observe this change. Somewhere we are equating diversity to labels, and that is where I think we are dividing our workforce behind these labels. And we need to invest conscious efforts to rise above the labels and see how we can look at the potential of the person and not the label which that person is representing. Similarly, I mean, we all know what happened, let's say, last month, right? Some election happened and somebody won and all. And that person or individuals like that represent an ideology, right? And then, of course, I am surrounded by especially these cisgender men who worship these men. And of course, when worship these men, they resonate with the ideology these men are coming from. So, what is happening then? These men wear pride lanyards at the workplace because the organization is mandating it, but deep down their ideology is completely anti-LGBTI+. So on ground, they are completely reluctant to carry out an initiative which can make an impact when we talk about LGBTI plus inclusion. So that is where, with visibility, with conversation and communication, the voices that are damaging the movement, the voices that are dissing the identity of specially trans persons and non-binary individuals are also getting amplified. So, what I hope is when these voices are getting amplified, at the same time, the voices that stand for trans persons, the voices that stands for non-binary individuals also get amplified. And that is where I'm heavily counting on allies, cisgender, heteronormative allies, to amplify these voices, because that's the only hope, I think, which can continue the movement further. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for, putting this out almost like an invitation. And I couldn't agree more that, the intentions would also amplify, like in times of COVID when we were pushed for it, and all the things that you talked about, how they can amplify. And then one, nudge in a wrong probably direction where we may start thinking very binary, right? uh, can bring all that effort which has gone in absolutely down. So thank you so much for sharing that. Veena, coming to you, what do you think has changed?
So that was a brilliant response. I think you covered everything more or less. Um, but when it comes to LGBTQIA inclusion or any kind of inclusion, I would even say sometimes um, gender, which is usually equated to woman somehow, like a man doesn't have a gender. At times like this, I do find sometimes in the corporate space, and I'm coming from an outsider, right? What happens is corporates come and tell us that we want to hire from the community. They tell us that we need women representation in this particular team. There are openings for a particular group, whether it's a trans group, a queer group, a woman group. In places like this, I do find one is that the conversations has started. So that I think is a big, big win. Of course, without getting the conversation started, I don't think we'd be anywhere. But having and of course, I have a different idea of the Aadhaar, and I'm more of a dissenter of rules and of someone telling me what to do. So while while there is conversations about it, I think one thing that that is required still is depth. I think that's what corporate India is lacking. I think, like you said, you can wear a rainbow lanyard and continue to act like you're an ally, but that's almost more scarier if I'm not wrong, right? So if you're wearing a rainbow lanyard and you're homophobic, I think it's almost regressive. It's safe, unsafe, more unsafe for me as a queer person that someone's able to do that. And of course, DEI push does come uh, from the head offices, and now with Trump being in power and his complete anti-DEI stance, I'm curious to see what corporate India will do. I'm curious to see how much of this mandate will trickle down to corporate India. I'm curious to see how much we'd like to continue to keep spaces safe for LGBTQ individuals, and how much we'd like to. And there's one thing is for sure: diversity is inevitable. There's nothing you can do about it. Everybody who is buying your product, who's consuming your product, is not just the cishet man. That has changed. A lot of income, a lot of spending expenses, or a lot of spending power has moved from that concentrated space. It's moved to perhaps women, perhaps other people in the families. So spending powers have gotten, I think, or spending has become younger and younger, the generation that is spending money. And the younger generation does want to be inclusive. The younger generation, I notice, doesn't feel the need for the boxes that we were talking about. They don't feel the need for binary. I think they're almost breaking out of that binary, and it's kind of hopeful. And also, I'm a little scared but curious as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that I think. So where is LGBT stand? We're
Yes.
somewhere in between. We'll see where it goes.
And yeah, I think, Amita talked about intention. You talked about seeing that intention through. And what does it really mean to live it? When we are committing to certain agendas, and I'm going to like double click on what you just said. And I'm going to move to the next segment where I want to ask you that, when organizations, and at least, I see a lot of organizations talk to me about the fact that gender is their priority.
Gender is
They say gender is their priority, and when they say gender, they don't mean non-binary individuals, they mean cis het
women.
women.
Yes.
And how can organizations consciously start addressing the spectrum?
So I think one thing is women need to start being in those boardrooms. I think non-binary folk need to start stepping into those boardrooms for one, because something that I notice with, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use some phrases that are, I think, uh, may not be okay, some frowned upon phrases, but what I've noticed is when there are tech bros sitting in a conference room, in that boardroom, they're making decisions that is convenient, that is easy. The moment you bring in diverse voices in there, there are going to be, you will see the need for diversity, one. Two is what you'll see is it's not, again, it's inevitable. So you'll notice that even if it was only men sitting there, sooner or later they would have stumbled onto diversity. But if there are other voices in that boardroom, if there are trans voices in the boardroom, if there are queer voices, if there are women voices in that boardroom, I think it'll be a big challenge, something that can challenge the status quo. I think what it'll do is it'll move away from, come on, let's not do something that's so simple and easy. Let's try a little harder, because at the end of the day, they are the people who are consuming our product. And I think that's what we need to. I think that will definitely change the language. Of I work with the police, with the Karnataka police. Even there, when they say gender, they mean women. We're still not talking the language of non-binary. We're still not talking the language of trans. We're still at that first. And even when it comes to women, we're still not okay with period leave. We're still not, we're still wondering, oh, she's come for an interview. Does she look pregnant? Is she someone we can trust to deliver over the next 1 year? Is this an investment worth, worth investing in? So I think those are things that definitely need to change. They need slightly more, not loud but more assertive voices in the boardroom. I think the tech bros need to be challenged a little bit.
Thank you, Veena. And on that, on the same line, I think I want to, and I'm going to go back to the conversation we were having backstage. What do you think about, so when we're talking about including the spectrum, I think talking about intersectionality is inevitable. And it's such an important topic. And you brought a very, very interesting perspective. So I'd really like you to share that around intersectionality and
Sure, sure. So, when I mention the risk or the reality where we are dividing the workforce into compartments with labels, one of the effective technique to kind of tackle that situation is intersectionality. So basically, breaking those boundaries which we are creating, and we are calling that as an inclusion. Now, let me also help you understand it maybe from a different lens, which I spoke to you about. I see so many women, in the audience. Of course, we live in India, and unfortunately, Indian society is still, barring metros and all, very patriarchal and misogynistic. You know, for a cisgender woman, the usual conversation, even today, in tier two cities, is about marriage. The moment she's born, the conversation is revolving her identity about marriage. Her body, she doesn't have right on her own body, she doesn't have right on her own choices, and with the flavor of spirituality, she's been worshipped as an idol of devotion and sacrifice. And that is where feminism comes into picture, which is in a way helping women to fight these shackles. Now let's look at trans identities. The fight is similar. Trans women have to fight to get their body that they want, they desire, right? Trans women have been ripped of the legal rights, the existence, their own identity, and that is why they have to fight. The moment a trans person comes out at home, usually what we see, that individual is abandoned by their own families. So families are not okay with their own identity. They are rubbing off the identities of that person and in a way taking charge of that person's existence, taking charge of that person's body, taking charge of that person's rights. And that is what the trans movement is all about, fighting against all these shackles, freedom of expression, being yourself, having your own identity, having equal rights, having equitable environment, This is how then the movements are similar. And that is where intersectionality comes into picture. So, especially when we talk about marginalized voices, when we talk about lesser represented voices, the fights are more or less similar. And that is why, rather than standing against each other, rather than opposing that you don't venture into my space, no, no. We need to stand together because the fights are similar. The fight is against the privilege, the fight is against oppression. And that is why intersectionality is the tool which can bind us together and fight against the oppression that is happening around us. So I guess that's
Because
what.
diversity does, in a way, I think what oppression does is it also oppresses the cishet man. And I think that is what is changing in the world right now, where the able bodied, upper caste, cishet man is also standing up and saying, I am feeling oppressed. I myself am, in spite of having the power that in whatever way the society has um thrown on me, I did not ask for this either. I want to stay at home and take care of my children. I love to cook and garden. I'd like to do that. And so that is what I think, everyone who's fighting, that was very, very nicely put, I think. What we're fighting against is oppression. What we're fighting against is silencing. And in some way, that intersectionality will bring in all of these people, all of these, almost everyone will be on one side and will be fighting a system. It's not even an individual that will be fighting, right?
But while you're saying this, Veena, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, sure, go ahead.
You know, I have again a slightly different, not different, but it's about my lived experience also.
And this is going to be a discourse. We did discuss that. So,
So, see, it's about coexistence. What is nature? So, I am heavy into backpacking. I love to dissolve into the mountains and explore and all. What does nature tell us? Nature tell us about diversity, which we fail to accept. So it equates to coexistence. So, for example, let's say marginalized individuals, what they are expecting to coexist with the privileged individuals. Where problem starts when privileged individuals, execute their privilege to oppress the marginalized individuals. And that is why what we need to consciously do is we are not opposing the ideology. If there is a left wing, there is right wing. There are seculars, there are non-seculars. In India is a country which is the best example of diversity. We have been coexisting for years and years. That's what we need to look at. That's what we need to learn. And that's what we need to adopt. And what we need to stop doing is invading others' territories, pushing our ideologies onto something else. And when somebody does that, that is where we need to have controls in place. Like if I need to mention from workplaces perspective. So I am not opposing those leaders who resonate with, let's say, right wing ideology. I am not opposing an individual who is a Trump admirer, who is Musk admirer, who doesn't believe in LGBTI plus identities. No, that is your ideology. You're free to have that. You're free to practice it in your own personal remit. But the moment you will use that to discriminate LGBTI plus individuals, that is where organizations need to have controls in place. That is where organizations need to carry out education, sensitization workshops. That is where organizations need to mandate it. That is where organizations need to have zero tolerance for intolerance policies. If some privileged, any individual is cracking a homophobic joke at the workplace, transphobic joke at the workplace, that person needs to be fired from their job. When we will have these controls in place, that is where we can minimize. Stopping is far-fetched dream, but minimize the discrimination that happens at workplaces even today and the crimes that happen at workplaces even today. Exit interviews. I mean, people who have been working in corporate, have you ever been asked this question in your exit interview? So, why not in exit interviews, this lens to be brought in? Was this person homophobic, transphobic in their team because of which, LGBTI plus individual or non binary individual is leaving? And when we have such scrutinies in place, that is where we can avoid that discrimination. Let that person practice their ideology in their own personal remits.
Thank you, Amita, for jumping straight in. And I think I want to double click on what you just said. Okay, because I think this is going to be a discourse because we all come from these lived experiences. So, um, according to you, Veena, what do you think organizations should hence do to create an environment for people who have privilege to acknowledge privilege and to be able to repurpose that?
So one of the things that I'd like to, I mean, adding to what Amita was saying, I think one of the things definitely is sensitization, having checks and balances in place. Very simply, sexist, homophobic, transphobic people need to be spoken to sternly. The point of freedom of choice or freedom of speech does not give you freedom from thought. You have to put your mind to what you're saying when you're at work, and don't take when you make jokes about somebody, um, uh, figure out a way to laugh with them and not to laugh at them. Those kind of things, for sure. What was your question again? Hold
Yeah.
on.
So, how do we get people who have privilege to acknowledge their privilege? Okay, because I see, I don't disagree that, we need to have pragmatic conversations at the workplace, right? But there is definitely a need for us to be able to create some form of conversation where people with privilege are able to acknowledge their privilege, and how do we get them to repurpose it?
So privilege is a touchy conversation. I'm not going to deny that. Privilege is going to be a touchy conversation. All of us, at any given point of time, have a certain amount of privileges that we carry, while we also carry our baggage. Reflection is definitely very, very important. Get your leadership to reflect on those privileges. Also, to kind of drill into all of us, I think, in some way.
Shall we do a privilege check with our audience?
Let's, okay.
Would you like to participate? How many? Give me a yes. Do you want to participate?
All right.
Okay, I think let's ask people from, I'm doing this spontaneously. My panelists are like, oh my God. So let's ask, the audience, what are some things which probably are looked at as privilege and probably, people
How many
from
of
the,
you come from the city, perhaps? How many of you were raised in a city?
okay.
Uh-huh.
How many of you don't have to think twice before using a washroom? Don't have to think if it is clean. All the women are like, no, 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 clean. We're not going. So, assuming the washrooms are clean, how many of you would still think twice before using a washroom? Okay. So,
In
that's
India,
privilege.
in
Yeah.
India, the moment you're born a male child, you are privileged. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. Forget
If
about
you're just born a
everything
man.
else. Even in cities, the moment a male child is born, even today, Raja Beta, Deepak, and all that narratives,
Yeah.
that itself is privilege, and that is where I see around, and I mean, I'm narrating my lived experiences. And I'm not stereotyping, but because you are blessed with that privilege, individuals fail to recognize that privilege because they never had to struggle. They never
Also,
had to struggle.
sorry. Also, I find that when you ask someone to recognize their own privilege, because in a country like ours, I guess I don't know what it is, but the scarcity that we come from, right? I feel like when you ask someone about, or ask ourselves to question our privileges, I think people get scared that you'll
Yes.
take something away from me, or I won't get the due credit for what I worked hard. And that is something I think that we need to start thinking about. That there are a lot of people here who have become techies at some point or the other, but a lot of us were not born and raised in a city setup. We're not born and raised in an urban setup. So even the fact that, small things like your parents speak English, your parents have been to college or school, that's a privilege. That itself, like your parents know what they're doing. A lot of times, a lot of our parents had never had the opportunity to go to school. So that nobody's taking anything from you. But all you need to do, and here's another thought. Just the moment you acknowledge your privilege, I swear to you, it will you'll feel like a big weight has dropped off of your shoulder. The moment I say, so one of the things that I learned by saying, and lived experiences, right? One of the things that as I started getting a little more into kind of activism and all of this, I realized the moment I am able to say that, yes, I am an urban, able bodied, upper caste, Brahmin. At least I was born in an upper caste Brahmin family. That's my privilege. Whether I like it or not, the way I look and the color of my skin and the language that I speak, um, I have I have few steps ahead in the same race that a lot of us are running. And that is something I think that the moment you recognize that for yourself, then anything that you would see, the lens completely changes. And I think it's a relief. It's almost a sense of relief that you hit on.
And I'm going to
No,
add
one,
on to that
one.
and say that, often, one of the things I talk about when we talk about privilege is the fact that, can we say, I don't know? I have this privilege and hence I don't know. I am a right handed person and I don't know what it means to be a left handed person who struggles every day, even to, use a washroom faucet. Right? So
Yes.
yeah, acknowledging that and saying, I don't know.
Yes.
Yes, you wanted to. Yes.
One dialogue just hit me. Some of you might have seen the show Control, right? Ananya
Yeah,
Pandey.
yeah.
So you know that debate conversation. I'll translate in English also. जहाँ से आपका struggle शुरू होता है वहीं तक तो हमें पहुंचना है. So it's like all of us saying this to men. The place where your struggle starts, we want to reach that place. That's the reality.
Thank
It is
you.
that, and privilege is a hard thing to accept. And I would urge you at some point to, there are people who ask me, why do you need to go to a therapist? Because I was, in some way, I'm not privileged enough to have a, what do you call it, a non-divergent mind. Um, but I also have the privilege to go to therapy. So
Yeah.
those are the things that we need to understand. Privilege is something that we're born with. I will never know what it feels like to be in a man's body. I will never know what it feels like to be the single bread earner in a family of four. I will never understand what that man's issues are, but I'm never coming in his way of doing what he wants to do. And that is what I think we are talking about. If you can't make the way, just don't come in our way at least, right? I will never know what it feels to feel that amount of dysphoria that I feel to transition. Those are things that I will not know. I'll not know how to inhibit anything other than who I am, and that's perfectly all right. What you need to do is have an open mind to learning, right? And I'll
and
stop. I'll
all,
stop.
and I'm gonna actually just segue that right into one of my favorite parts, and I think this is so important right now to talk about, which is while we're building inclusive workplaces, we're building employee resource groups. Do you think, and I'm going to ask you this first, Veena, which is while we're listening to the voices of people from the community and allies, do you think it is important to listen to the voices of the opposition? And I almost know that your answer is yes. So, how can we make space for this voice of the opposition and the organization to hear these counter narratives, and what are constructive ways to do so?
So, listening to the voices of opposition, of course, is important. Dissent is important. Um, Intent is also very important. Why are you opposing? If you're opposing for the fact that with the idea that this project needs to end well, we need to get to the objective or to get to the end of the road. Then I'll hear your opposition. But if you're just oppositioning or you're dissenting or you're fighting with me or you're arguing with me because you don't know my side of the story or you've got blinkers on, then no, that's something that I think I would like to say, what, I'd like you to rethink something. But opposition is very important. There are a few things that opposition does is it checks where you are headed, and because at some point we get so I think I'm learned activist. I'm not I don't think I was born one. But what I have learned is, because our everyday lives are so hectic and so off the normal track, that we are constantly swimming against the tide, I think it makes sense to sometimes stop and see where this opposition is coming from. Of course, there's a need to listen to them. Also, intent is very important. So, in case somebody wants to continue to be homophobic, then I think they are missing out at some point on all the fun that non-homophobic people are having, and where all we're going and how many parties we're doing. You're just going to miss out on that. But opposition is, of course, important. There's place and need for that. I'm a big proponent of mediation and arbitration and totally bringing everything on the table. I find vulnerability is always a good thing to carry. I know we've been taught otherwise, but I feel vulnerability is a tool that we should carry with us to work every day. Put it on the table and say, these are my vulnerabilities, and trust that the person in front of you will not take undue advantage of that. And I think once you place that trust, then we see where it goes after that, I guess.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I
Yeah,
answered your question.
authentic conversations. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you, Veena. And before I segue this to you, Amita, I want to actually ask the audience: how many of you think that everyone should be an ally? Put your hand up if you think everyone should be an ally.
There are some people who don't want to be allies. We
Yeah,
meet
it's a
outside.
choice, and it was a trick question. So I wanted to kind of pass on a message that allyship is a choice, and it takes a lot of energy to actually convert somebody into an ally who's not convinced. Then you would, I mean, you rather spend that energy on somebody who's willing to learn and be curious and build awareness. And on that note of building awareness and curiosity, we all operate from our set of values. And as a leadership trainer, I think that's one of the biggest struggle, which at least I have found, that if I'm anchored onto a set of values, how do I suddenly challenge those values? How do I suddenly uh, shift from those set of values, right? So what are your views on that, in the sense that how can allies and people in the workplace navigate this dissonance between their personal values and their organization values? Which is, I'm homophobic, but my organization says that you need to include everybody. So what are your views on that?
So, I prefer using the word accomplishship rather than allyship. Because when we talk about allyship is more about support and solidarity. And that is where it can lead to bigotry. I mean, when you are in the organization remit, okay, I support, I accept, but the moment you're out of the organization's remit, you're extremely homophobic, transphobic. That is where maybe we need to move on to accomplishship from allyship. Because when we say accomplishship, it is about action. Fine, you're saying you support and accept, but what actions have you taken? Have you amplified the voices of lesser represented communities, lesser represented individuals? And action also leads to accountability. For example, let's say diversity goals being integrated into the performance conversations, performance reviews. That is where people managers made accountable for the diversity ratios, including LGBTI plus individuals. I mean, again, I'm not venturing into coming out at the workplace kind of a conversation here, but having clearly articulated goals make individuals accountable and deliver on it. Otherwise, they might miss out on the career progression prospects that they have in the organization. Similarly, then when we talk about accomplishship, putting lesser represented individuals, lesser represented voices at the center. For example, let's say there is a tech conference in the organization. Why can't individuals from Pride group be panelists on that particular event? Why they need to be panelists only on the Pride event? And that is why, I'm really thankful to this particular platform where it is not only speaking for cisgender women, it is including similar voices which have been oppressed for generations. And that is what accomplishship is all about. And that is what, when we talk about this narrative, it will push individuals to just get away from the lens of support and solidarity and get in action. And that is how we can change individuals, at least from discrimination perspective, not from the ideology perspective, at least at the workplaces. Because employment opportunities, right? I mean, employment opportunities can go long way when we talk about lesser represented individuals, LGBTI plus individuals. It can uplift them. It can give that enablement for them to march ahead in their struggles.
Thank you, Amita. And I think we're at the end of our time, so I have a quick rapid fire, and anyone can answer this. Okay, so diversity for me is
Diversity for me is lived experiences, which is beyond label, because we are talking about thought diversity, and we can only have thought diversity at the table when we have different lived experiences at the table.
how beautifully put. That's the first time I'm hearing something like that. Um,
Wait. Diversity for me.
so I was hoping it's like a rapid fire, so you have to be rapid,
Okay,
Veena.
sorry.
But
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. Diversity for me is one, is it's inevitable. You cannot do anything about it.
Hmm.
Not everybody is going to be cishet. We better get on board with the program. Diversity for me is growth as well. I think it helps you grow leaps and bounds for sure. So I'll stop.
No, I'm not giving the eyes yet. Okay, the next one, and this has to be rapid. I feel most alive when.
Um, do you want to go?
Go for it, Veena.
When I have a mic in my hand, I get
When you have a.
when I have a mic in my hand. I had no other choice other than to feel my heartbeat and watch all of you nodding. And I really, I think I thrive on that, even though I feel I have a lot of stage fright, but I thrive on teaching. I'm a teacher by profession. So.
Lovely.
I think I feel most alive like when I'm able to indulge into my backpacking adventure, when I'm getting these opportunities where I
Yeah,
can
that too.
have conversations and influence
That's
minds.
my answer as well.
Yeah.
I'm feeling very alive right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one is beyond binary is. Complete the sentence.
Okay.
And you both can do it.
So, see, I think beyond binary is all of us accepting and acknowledging the reality of nature that, identities are not just two. Identities are not just, two identities. It lies between these two identities, and that's where we as a humankind thrive.
Yes, binary is beyond the binary is how do you call it? Over the rainbow, um, almost on either sides of the spectrum. When you it's the spectrum. Beyond binary is intelligent. I think that's what it is. We need to start looking at beyond the binary. We need to start looking at the grays. We need to start looking at all the colors. I think, yeah.
I'm just like suddenly thinking, what is beyond binary for me? And I'm also going to answer this, which is beyond binary for me is I think that space for a pause, that space for curiosity. And with that, I think we come to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much, all of you lovely people, for also participating in this panel in many ways. And I also want to share that all the three of us, I think the lives we've lived, the journeys we've had have been nothing but a metamorphosis. So I hope you listened to us with your heart and not your mind. So thank you so much. And thank you, GHCI and Shreya, for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you.
Ask if there are any questions.
Yes. Are we taking questions? Also?
No,
Yes, I know
unfortunately.
we've run out of time.
But